That's how it works. We record, then we do the share. And there it is. Still having trouble with all the browsers and everything like that. Anyway, what we do this week is the next thing in the 19th century is photography. And that's another, we'll do the history of photography today and the telegraph next week. If you will note, we do have one more extra credit live for today based on last Tuesday's recording. Hint, hint, you should be able to figure it out yourself. And here's the photo history. It's today, extra credit due on Friday. Next week, we will do a new essay, and that essay is going to be unintended consequences. Unintended consequences means things you don't expect to happen with technology. Like when we talked about the high-speed press, the unintended consequence was Frederick Douglass and the discussion of abolition, the women's movement, all of those things that people started to read about. Think about that in photography as we do photography today. And again, you can start thinking of unintended consequences of any media, modern or past, for next week. Okay. Slideshow. Okay. Look at these ancient pictures. These are some of the earliest pictures of Revolutionary War. These are people who fought in the Revolutionary War in the 1780s. And look at them. Here they are. They're not Washington or Alexander Hamilton or Jefferson. What difference does, for anybody, actually seeing somebody from the Revolutionary War make? What difference does that make you think about? And these are the same ones, same or similar ones. Okay, here's some other old pictures. 1840. Washington, D.C., 1840. This is what Washington, D.C. looked like in 1843. I'll move up kind of fast. Ooh. Anti-Catholic nativist riots. We don't want foreigners, 1844. Some things never change. The young Ulysses S. Grant, he was a short guy before the beard. You get the point. What difference does seeing old pictures from the 1840s make? Anybody? All of a sudden, they're real. They're not drawings anymore. They're real people doing real things. We know what the 1840s really looked like in a way we didn't make other things, the way we don't know what other things looked like.
This is a quick look at how photography has developed. Photography is hinged on the discovery that if you poke a hole in the wall of a darkroom, you create camera obscura. Light passing through the hole is projected upside down and retains color and perspective. The first historical mentions of camera obscura in pinhole photography are by ancient philosophers Mouzy, Aristotle, and Alhazen. In 1490, Leonardo da Vinci records detailed descriptions of camera obscura and uses it to trace stuff.
This is what a lot of artists did. They would shine a light on the wall, it would go into the little box, and then you would trace the outline. So you would have a very realistic sort of picture.
1700s, camera obscura devices are common, and there's evidence to suggest artists like Rembrandt, Vermeer, and Caravaggio used them. Sketchy. In 1724, Johann Heinrich Schulze discovers that substances mixed with silver nitrate react to light. Sadly, the images fade soon after. Until one day in 1826, the world's first photograph is taken by Joseph Nicephore Niepce in France using a procedure called heliography. Voila!
First ever photograph taken. It's now housed at the University of Texas, Austin. Pointed it out the back room. The problem is with the camera obscura that you have to draw. Here, it etched the picture on a plate, and then he burned the plate and got this image.
This exposure takes several days, and you can see the sun lights up both sides of the building.
Yeah, it took 7 days of exposure, several days of exposure.
After his death, Niepce's partner Louis Daguerre continues his work and creates the first practical photographic process in 1833, the daguerreotype. In 1839, the French government buys and declares...
There you go. The first real photography is called the daguerreotype. He used Niepce's idea, and he shortened the exposure time to a few seconds, burned the plate, and then he got all the scientists together and said, voila, I have photography. And he called it the daguerreotype. The point is, he didn't invent photography. He improved it. He marketed photography. Like a lot of inventors, his genius wasn't technical so much as it was marketing. And then he sold the patent to the French government, and photography went everywhere. And again, we remember Daguerre's name, not because he invented photography, but because he marketed.
Where's the daguerreotype free to the world? This is when cool stuff starts happening. Like the first photo of a human. Although this exposure lasted around 7 minutes, a man was getting his shoes polished and was standing perfectly still, thus making history. This was also the first photo with soul. And of course, the world's first selfie is taken by a guy named Robert Cornelius. And human's gonna human. It wouldn't take long for nude photography to kick off too.
What can you say?
In 1840, Henry Fox Talbot unveils the calotype, a process based on negatives that allows for paper copies to be made. However, Talbot tried to charge license fees for the calotype, so it didn't really catch on. Compared to Daguerre, whose name is now one of 72 names inscribed on the Eiffel Tower, Talbot spent his life fighting lawsuits and eventually gave up on photography. You could say Talbot became a bit negative in the end. It's also important to mention the contribution of Sir John Herschel, who published many essential research papers and coined the term photography, from the Greek words of light in drawing. By the 1850s, mobile photo studios were all the rage because photos had to be developed on site. Exposure times were about 3 minutes long, so people used neck braces and drugs to keep still. It's also why nobody smiled in early photos. What could be the world's first Photoshop occurs in 1861. The head of Abraham Lincoln is placed on a more noble body. The world's first color photograph is also produced. It's of a bow. In 1871, Richard Leach Maddox, who had an outstanding mustache, invents the gelatin dry plate. This means smaller cameras and no tripods necessary. Great success, old chap. Now, here's a cool story, bro. In order to settle the debate of whether all four of a horse's hooves ever simultaneously leave the ground, Englishman Edward Muybridge sets up 12 cameras with wire triggers in the path of a galloping horse. The world's first photo sequence proves that they do. In 1885, George Eastman, founder of Eastman Kodak, invents roll.
He invented the roll film, and he's walking around going, what should I name the company? And he's clicking the shutter on the camera. Kodak, it's the noise a camera makes when you click the shutter. That's what it's based on.
Film. The first handheld camera, the Kodak, goes on sale in 1888.
Branding.
Why Kodak?
Okay.
Because Eastman just liked the letter K. The Kodak came preloaded with 100 exposures that needed to be sent back to the factory for processing and reloading when the roll was finished. Eastman takes mass-market photography a step further in the early 1900s with the Brownie, an affordable box camera that introduces the concept of the snapshot. Light's employee Oscar Barnack builds the revolutionary 35mm Leica 1, which goes into production in 1925. The camera allows photographers to go mobile and capture the moment. Some of the most iconic images in history would later be taken on Leicas. The first single-lens reflex SLR camera arrives in 1949. And the first digital image is created from a scan in 1957. However, digital cameras would only arrive a little later, in 1975, when Steve Sasson, a young engineer working for Eastman Kodak, invents the first digital camera. But nobody at Kodak is interested in digital. Who wants to see their photos on a TV? Why change the profitable film photography formula? Too late. Kodak only later switches to digital in 2004 and files for bankruptcy in 2012. The digital revolution begins in the 90s. DSLRs, point and shoots. Photography had never been more accessible. Well, until the first mobile phone with a camera came out in 2000. Game changer. 15 years later, and modern smartphones now have insanely powerful cameras. In just seconds, we are able to capture every moment and share it online. Photography has become a global passion and has truly brought the world closer together.
All right. Shows you it keeps evolving. All our media.
Hold on. Let me take another selfie here.
Hello.
What takes a fraction of a second today would have astounded its 19th century.
Okay. Go away. But yeah. Now, it changed how we see the world. Again, before this, you either describe it or you have to see a drawing. Now you see what things really are. But again, with manipulation, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. Here are early pictures. Oh, okay, they deleted this one. Okay, here's another early one. Okay, it's one thing to talk about. Look at what freedom. This is what people went through.
Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Yep. It's one thing to talk about it. It is another thing to actually see what people went through. Changes the way you look at things. Okay. Too many windows. All right. And of course, shortly thereafter, we have the Civil War. Hello.
Matthew Brady establishes his first studio in New York in 1844, and by the 1860s is one of
1844. Daguerre just announced it in 1839. So photography took off very quickly because Daguerre sold his copyright to the French government and they gave it to everybody, and it spread like wildfire.
one of the foremost portrait photographers in the United States. The public is assembling photographic albums and filling the pages not only with pictures
That was Harriet Tubman.
of family and friends, but they're also filling their albums with images of the leaders of the day. And Brady is one of the primary sources for such photographs.
Andrew Jackson, 1845, still alive here in Nashville. Brady went down and took a picture of Andrew Jackson on the, guy on the $20 bill.
It's interesting because it shows him very well turned out. It's a very impressive figure of a man. In other words, it's a very impressive figure of a man who could be president, who you should vote for. And afterwards, he said that Mr. Brady and the Cooper Union made me president.
Now, this is kind of interesting. Lincoln sends him out to the battlefield at Gettysburg. And as we saw, you kind of have to sit still to get a good picture. What sits still? Dead bodies. Brings back not happy portraits and public relations, but the reality of war.
He was driven. He knew that it might not be the most business-wise thing to do, but he knew that he had to document the Civil War.
The terrible reality and earnestness, not some, not some romantic, lovely, heroic tale, but the dirt and the grit and the death.
When Brady came back from the Battle of Antietam, he showed the pictures of all of the dead. And people would gather around and look at them in awe. It was the first time that Americans had seen their own dead, and you half expected that someone would cry out that they recognized an uncle, a father, a brother, a son. It was just horrific. It was the first time that people had seen the real horrors and how bloody the battles were.
to see pictures of dead people.
He was one of the first to really understand photography as an art. Brady had a vision for photography that was bigger than anybody else had had previously. And he was out front. He was out front in terms of having multiple studios. He was out front in getting sitters to come sit for him. He was out front in thinking about documenting the Civil War and all the players, cultural players and political players. And so there's just so much material. Nobody can outdo him for that era.
So the point is that the war comes into people's homes and it becomes real. Again, as I say, he was sent out to build support, showed some of these pictures, and people go, I'm not going. New York City, they had draft riots. One person who sat out the war and bought out his draft was Theodore Roosevelt Sr. Teddy Roosevelt Jr., of course, thought otherwise. So that's early photography. Anyway, so it really changed the way we look at things. It made it real. So that's basically what I wanted to cover today. Again, unintended consequences. We will see again and again how visual imagery does not help patriotism sometimes. Because, again, war photos can be challenging. So, things to consider. Anyway, we have a short extra credit question just to keep your interest up based on last time. And next time we'll do the Telegraph. Questions?
Well, when will the extra credit pop up, or is it already on Canvas?
It should be on your, it should be there. Should be on.
I'm looking through Canvas on the modules and things, and I don't.
See, it says extra credit, and its green little spot on mine says it's published. So I'll double check.
Yeah, on mine it just says just the 19th century and the photo history.
I'll double check that right now.
Okay.
But beyond that, anything else? All right. Well, have a lovely afternoon. We'll talk about next time. We will talk about, next time, we will talk about, let's see if someone had some. Okay, yes, we did see that. I'll fix that right away. But next time we'll talk about the Telegraph.
All righty, we'll see you later.
All right.